I'm telling this sweet baby girl's story, and she didn't want to be left out. Do you want to say hi? Welcome back to the Barreto family. This video has been a long time coming. 9 months in the making, and we are now 3 months postpartum, so that's where we're at. This video was delayed for 2 reasons. One, if you realize, this is our home in Colombia, and so travel and all sorts of that chaos just delayed things. And then 2, this video has taken a lot of mental and emotional processing. If you noticed by the title or the thumbnail, our birth didn't go as we had hoped, as we had planned, as we had expected. What keeps coming to my mind is there's so many YouTubers out there that they've almost coined this phrase, redemptive birth. And that was so much what I was hoping for with the birth of my second daughter. My first birth story was really difficult, really traumatic. It also did not go as we had hoped or planned, but it was just a very traumatic birth. And so prepping for this birth, we planned a VBAC. So we wanted a natural birth after cesarean. My first birth was a C-section. And so that was what I thought was going to give me the redemptive birth story that I had wanted. And I didn't get that. And right after the birth, which I will tell you all about, I've got notes to make sure I keep on track. But right after the birth, I was so sad because I thought I had lost the opportunity to have my redemptive birth story. But as I processed and looked back, I realized even though the birth didn't go as I had planned, God still gave me that redemptive story. And the reason was because with my first birth, and I'll put that story up here, I was so alone. I felt absolutely alone. And I remember being in that OR and being ignored. And again, that story's up here, but being so ignored and feeling alone. And in this birth, even though it was insane, and I'll tell you why in a second, I never once felt alone. So I didn't get the natural birth that I wanted. However, I still got a redemptive birth because God was there. And this time, even though God was there in my first birth, with this birth, I felt his presence every second. And it's so funny. I had so much less fear during this birth than I did in my first. But this birth, I had so many more reasons to be fearful. So without further ado, let's jump into it. I waited 3.5 months to try not to break down. So we'll see how we do. But 1:38 a.m. I woke up with super strong contractions, and I just kind of waited and walked around and did all sorts of just moving and whatnot. And the contractions persisted. I figured they would go away. This was 1 day before my induction. I was already 40 weeks, 4 days. 40 weeks, 5 days. And so they were going to induce 40 weeks, 6 days, Sunday. So this was Saturday morning at 1:38 a.m. At 5 a.m., I woke my husband and I was like, all right, time to get ready to go to the hospital. I already had my bag packed. He had most of his packed, just had to throw a few more things in the bag. We took a few minutes just to check and make sure, okay, we've got everything we need. We have everything for Eliana. My sister was in town. She flew in with my sweet nephew, and we had been staying separate. The original plan was to all stay at the Airbnb, but both of them had kind of a cold, and going into birth, we were like, all right, let's get through the birth, make sure that I don't get sick. And so we were staying at what we called the bunny house because they had a bunny and that was Eliana's favorite part. And so at 5 a.m. we're like, all right, we got to get our stuff and we got to get Eliana over to the Airbnb with my amazing sister. I cannot thank her enough for everything she did for me and everything she did for Eliana. We knew going into this that Eliana would be taken care of. And so that was essential. And her being there meant that my husband got to focus on me. So anyway, we got everything ready. We got in the car. 6:30, we left We finally left the house with our hospital bags. So yeah, it took us an hour and a half, 5 to 6:30, getting everything ready. Left the house and got Eliana ready to go over with her overnight bag, things to drop off at the Airbnb with my sister. Ooh, okay. Pretty sure it's baby day. You ready to meet baby sister?
Yeah, but
I've been having contractions since 1:30 in the morning. Woke me up. It is now 7:07. Very consistent contractions. Just got to dropping off Eliana with her aunt and cousin. And then Daddy and I are headed 25 minutes to the hospital. So here we go.
I want to go with you to the hospital.
I know. When we have baby sister, then we'll come get you so that you can come meet baby sister, okay? I know you want to go, babes. I'm sorry. And we headed from the Airbnb to the hospital at roughly like 7 o'clock. Literally, it was just drop Eliana and go. We made it to the hospital about 7:20. So not a whole lot of time. Arrived at the hospital. But before I continue, I want to give a thanks. If this video happens to, now I'm gonna cry. Okay, we're gonna make it. If this video happens to be seen by any of my doctors or any of my nurses, any of my care staff, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for keeping myself and my daughter safe, for keeping my husband informed, and for just caring for us and loving us and doing everything possible to make sure that everything turned out as well as it did. Your quick actions, your calm decisions, your medical knowledge are the reasons that everything went as smoothly as they did in the midst of chaos. We know that things could have ended so much differently, but it was because of God, first of all, but also because of each of you and your care that I am sitting here today, that I get to be a mom to my sweet little girls. So from the bottom of our hearts, we thank you. We will forever be thankful to each and every one of you for your thoughtfulness, your kindness, your care, your prayers, and just everything that you did for us throughout the birth and through recovery. So thank you. At about 7:25-ish, we were in triage, waiting to see if they would admit me. They ended up checking and I was only 3 centimeters dilated, which honestly was a bit disheartening because I was in quite a bit of pain. I had already been in labor, like active labor, since about 1:30 that morning. And they kept me on a fetal monitor and they were monitoring my contractions. And as we waited to see if they were going to have me stay, they were talking about sending me home. Another mom came in laboring. And so they only had 2 triage rooms and we were both there. And there was talk of sending me home. And that was like, they were talking, I was only 3 centimeters, so they were going to send me home and have me come back when I was a little further along. They only had 1 labor and delivery room that was not yet open. So it was getting ready to be cleaned and opened up. But at 8:30, the triage nurse stuck her head in. And I still remember, she looked at me and she goes, "You're in more pain than the other mom. You've got the room."
Hasta que por fin, vamos a ver cuánto tiempo nos tardamos acá.
1:30 contraction started. What is it?
8:24.
8:24 officially admitted. Last little baby girl. And that was the first of so many miracles, because had they sent me home, this story would have been totally different. I was only 3 centimeters. It didn't necessarily warrant me being the one that got the room, but had they sent me home, this story would not have turned out as it did. So, first of many miracles, and I don't say that lightly. So yeah, they made the decision partly because I was definitely in more discomfort than the other mom, but also because I had my induction scheduled for the next day. So they were kind of like, all right, let's just keep her, let's get it going, whatnot. At 8:45, my OB stopped in and asked me what our birth plan was. Like, we had already talked through it, but she wanted to like touch base. She was like, so what's your plan, mama? And I was like, I mean, I feel like I can still labor, like I'm in pain, but I'm okay. Like I can do this a little bit longer. I was in the process. So it's called a TOLAC, a trial of labor after C-section. And so I was still in this TOLAC window trying to go through a natural birth is what I'm going to call it after a cesarean birth, which was my first one, hoping for a VBAC, which is a vaginal birth after cesarean. She asked me if I wanted an epidural, and what had happened was we had talked about this prior to me going into labor and everything, and they had recommended that I do get an epidural no matter what. I would have loved to have tried to do a totally natural birth, but from the start they recommended an epidural simply because if for some reason I couldn't have a natural birth and needed a C-section, I would have already had it put in, the epidural. And so we could have gone back with my husband to the OR. However, if I had chosen not to do an epidural, then it was possible that he wouldn't be allowed to be with me in the OR if it turned into a C-section. So I hope that makes sense. They had recommended epidural just in case it turned into a C-section so that my husband could be present with me. And I said yes. So I said, absolutely, I will do the epidural because I know that was kind of the recommended course since it is a TOLAC in hopes of a VBAC. But I think I can hang out. And so I don't know, like I've never done this before. I feel like I'm okay. What does this look like? What does the next steps of birth look like? I had no idea. She looks at me and she goes, well, my plan is to break your water. And my sister had told me that ramps things up. And I was like, okay, we want an epidural before that. And she goes, okay, we will call them in. It is a Saturday, so they have to come in. They're not necessarily here in the hospital. They're within like a 10-minute on-call radius, but we'll get him called in so that he can be ready to do your epidural as soon as possible. And then as soon as that's in, we'll break your water. So we had that discussion in the triage room. And like, I'm sitting here thinking, I don't want the epidural to prolong labor. I can still hang in there. I don't know what normal is. And this doctor, this OB was amazing. She just encouraged me that there is no normal. So whatever I decided was okay. This was at 8:45 that conversation happened. At 9 o'clock, they moved me to the labor and delivery room. So 15 minutes had passed. And at that point, my contractions had ramped up to like a minute to 2 minutes max between contractions. It was literally so intense by the time they moved me back to that room. And I remember they had brought in like one of those big yoga balls and we're talking about, because like they put the yoga ball on the bed and we're teaching my husband how to do counter pressure on my back and things. And I started feeling severe pain, but only along my previous incision. And so that should have been like our first red flag. Second red flag was I was only 3 centimeters, but my contractions were maybe a minute apart. Like they were coming. And at one point it was back to back. Like I didn't even have 15 seconds between contractions. While they were doing my epidural, it was contraction after contraction, 0 let up. So those are 2 not so great signs at 3 centimeters dilated, just to give you a little bit of preface. I was moved back, didn't really think anything of it because I just figured this is labor pain. I had never had labor pains because my previous C-section was at 39 weeks, never experienced it. I figured it was normal. It was not normal. As we waited for the anesthesiologist, I kept laboring. My labor nurse, I'm gonna not use names just because I don't know how they would feel, but I will call her Trudy. My labor nurse knows who she was, but we're gonna call her Trudy. She taught my husband how to give me counter pressure on my back. They brought me this birthing ball. She was so encouraging, talking me through the contractions, just an amazing partner in it, partnering with my husband to partner with me. It was just awesome. At 9:30, they officially placed my epidural, and it took them various tries, which doesn't surprise me because here in Colombia as well, when they were doing the spinal to put me under for my first C-section, it also took them various tries to get it. So that didn't really surprise me. But the hardest part was I had no weight between contractions. It was back to back to back to back contractions. And so I'm literally having contractions through it, trying not to move while they're in my back, which is scary. He mentioned that my anatomy was a little bit tricky, but that soon the epidural would start to take effect. So just wait a few minutes, within the next couple of contractions, it would be taking effect. But my husband and I had no idea that at this point, our birth plan was about to take a complete 180. Everybody left the room. It was about 9:35. Like literally it's been 5 minutes. They put the epidural in. I laid back on the bed. Everybody walked out of the room. They said, hey, we'll be back in a few minutes to check on you. Within a couple contractions, it starts to take effect and the contractions should kind of calm down a little bit. And they all left. They were going to come back shortly with the OB to break my water. FYI, that never happened. Because only a few contractions after they placed my epidural, I was laying in bed and I felt 2 pops. Like the only way I can describe it is if it had been audible, it would be a pop, but it was just like these 2 pops in my lower abdomen and then just searing pain that I cannot even begin to describe. Like, I don't know how I remained conscious through the pain that I was feeling. And I just held completely still. And I looked at my husband and I said, push a red button. And he looks at me and he's like, what? I was like, I need you to push a red button. Find a red button and push a red button. I needed like the code blue type call button. All I needed was medical staff in my room. And he, in his mind, was thinking, she's just in labor. Like, this is normal, right? I don't understand what's going on, but I couldn't explain to him in that instance. I just needed medical professionals. And so he found a button, alerted the staff. One person came running into my room and I explained to her, I think he hit the button on my bed remote. And within seconds, Trudy was back in my room. I explained to her what I had felt and she immediately called doctors, nurses, OB, and I explained again what had happened. And in what seemed like seconds, all available staff members were in my room. And they began to do a physical exam. Everything just at that point, honestly, all timestamps become a complete blur. Everything happened so quickly. The OB, who I am so grateful for, we'll call her Sandra. We're just making up names. We'll call her Sandra. With the utmost compassion in her voice, she grabbed my hand and looked at me as she said, I'm sorry, Mama, we have to do a C-section. She saw the tears pooling in my eyes, much like they are right now. And she moved to the head of my bed. She grabbed my hand and with what I can only describe as comfort and understanding and love. Her words were a bit of a blur, but she was so compassionate. Whatever she said, I can't remember exactly. But she informed me that it was almost certain that my uterus had ruptured during labor and that we needed to do an emergency C-section now. They handed Andres his OR attire, the gown, the hat, the foot coverings, and everybody else proceeded to move all about the room, getting things ready and moving and things. And I kept seeing him out of the corner of my eye, getting himself ready. Andres was getting dressed, and this rapid fire list of questions was being asked about my previous anesthesia history. At this point, they realized that I had not officially signed the permission for a C-section, which, being a trial of labor after C-section, that should have been one of the first papers that I signed coming in. They didn't have time to print one and needed to move me to the OR. So the OB looks at me and she goes, "Do you give verbal consent for a C-section? I need verbal consent for a C-section." And without hesitation, I just looked at her and said yes. Like, at this point, my life is on the line. And in that moment, all I wanted was for our baby girl to be okay. That's all I could think about. I just wanted her to be okay. They wheeled me out of the room, and on our way down to the OR, they continued with questions. The anesthesiologist kept asking me things about medical history. As we're walking down the hall, both the OB and the anesthesiologist were talking back and forth about the possibilities, like, is it going to be an epidural C-section, or is that still an option? Are they going to need to do general anesthesia? And I looked at her and I said, "Do whatever you need. I just want to be okay, and I want my baby to be okay." She knew that the most important thing for me was to have my husband present. Like I said, in my first C-section, I was so alone. My husband wasn't allowed to be with me because that's Columbia protocol. And I just felt so alone, and I wanted him with me so badly. But when it switches to general anesthesia, he's no longer allowed to be with me. So in that moment, I lost that. I lost my support partner. And I didn't have that luxury with my first C-section, and I thought no matter what, even if it has to be a C-section, I would get that with my second. But this wasn't a normal C-section. After that comment, they made that decision to do general anesthesia, which meant my husband wouldn't be present. But I asked them to please send someone who spoke Spanish, that he needed to understand what was going on. And that I wanted him not to be alone. Even if I had to be alone, I wanted someone to be with him. Once we were in the OR, things moved so quickly. And yet they had so much compassion. As they were doing each step of the way, they had so much compassion. It was a splash and crash. So they threw the betadine across my entire stomach. And what's weird is even with the epidural placed, I could still feel that. I could still feel cold, which wasn't supposed to happen. There was one nurse, and her job was literally to be with me. She mentioned later on she didn't have any patients that day, so she got to be kind of the floater. And because of that, she got the job of being up by my head, of taking place of my husband. She got to be my support person. We'll call her Emma. And she was my favorite nurse during my entire hospital stay. And to be honest, I will call her my second miracle of this entire ordeal. As the room buzzed with people and words like splash and crash and emergency kept floating around, Emma stayed calm and reassured me every second of the process. She walked me through what was going on. I said very little because there was so much going on. One of my first questions was if my baby girl was okay. And I still remember the compassion in Emma's eyes as she looked at me and she said, "I'm sorry, you're sterile now, so we can't have the baby monitor on. But baby girl's vitals were taken less than 2 minutes ago, and she was strong and healthy. She was not in distress, and she was stable." I also asked them to relay a message to my husband. I said, "Can you please tell my husband to call one of our mentors, to call John and pray?" Unfortunately, that message never got to my husband, but it did spark the third miracle of the day. As soon as I said that, I asked, "Can you send someone to tell my husband to call and pray?" My OB, the doctor, looked at me and she goes, "Kayla, do you want us to pray right now?" Obviously, I said yes. And she stopped the entire OR to pray. Everybody stood still. And she prayed over the situation, over the surgery, over me. That doesn't happen. Like, the fact that this incredible doctor saw the importance and she stopped everything to pray. Another miracle. In this moment of fear and chaos, in all honesty, all I felt was peace. And what's weird is, as soon as my uterus had ruptured back in the labor and delivery room, I stopped having contractions. I don't know if that's normal or what, but I was no longer feeling contractions. All I could think was just hold still, because I didn't know what was going on inside my body. Well, they prayed in the OR. And minutes passed as they continued to prep me. Even with the epidural, like I said, I could feel that cold betadine poured over my entire abdomen. They put more medicine through the epidural, but it never put my lower body to sleep. They kept asking me if I could move my feet, and I could like legitimately lift my legs. Shouldn't happen. So the epidural never fully took effect. Every few minutes they'd ask me to move my legs. I still could. They would ask me if I could feel them, and without a doubt, I could tell them that they were pinching. It felt like they were like pinching me with nails to check. And then they needed a second anesthesiologist to be present because it was going to be a general anesthesia, and that was just part of the hospital policy. I don't know all the ins and outs, but they were waiting, and this anesthesiologist was still en route to the hospital because they aren't in the hospital on weekends. They got lidocaine and tried to use that like a local numbing anesthetic, but I could still feel them and could still move my legs. Literally, these minutes felt like an eternity. During this time, I tried to stay calm because honestly, that was the only thing I could do, was control myself, was to breathe, was to try to keep myself and my sweet baby girl safe, because everything else was out of control. There were moments that I sang. The song that was in my mind was "Our God is an Awesome God," and if I remember right, Emma sang right along with me. She prayed the entire time I was conscious. Like, she was there right by me, praying the entire time. In that moment, I declared that song, "Our God is an Awesome God," and I hoped and prayed that all would be okay. As I sang, Emma continued to whisper short prayers into my ear. Finally, the second anesthesiologist arrived, and very quickly they put me under. The last thing I remember hearing before I went under was cricoid pressure. I believe it was the anesthesiologist, because I think it was one of the only males in the room, asking for cricoid pressure. I didn't realize that at that time they were intubating me. I found out later that I had been intubated when it created all sorts of challenges for the postpartum phase, so that was fun. But we'll talk about that in a second. And this video is already getting very long. If you're still with me, thank you. I haven't even started sharing yet. Like, we haven't gotten anywhere yet. Oh. I should just read this because otherwise it's going to be too long. After surgery and over the course of the next few days, I learned more about what happened from my nurses. They came in and chatted with me, and here are some of the miraculous things that we learned about the surgery. So my body metabolizes drugs really quickly, specifically anesthesia. And even under general anesthesia, they said that it took them more than the normal amount of time to get me fully under. I don't recall it because my memory of it isn't there. But they told me that even after they applied the general, I was still moving my legs for various minutes. They would ask me things and I would still respond. I don't remember doing it, but that happened. They also informed us that in a normal C-section, you cut through about 7 layers. You've got skin, you've got fat, you've got muscle. When my uterus ruptured, it broke through the majority of those layers. They only had to cut through, like, literally the doctor describes, she barely set the scalpel on my skin and pulled, and my entire uterus, like, everything opened up. The baby was virtually on the outside. It was one thin layer of skin that was keeping my baby inside at that point. I had opened up so much that there was nothing was holding it together. It literally took such a thin, such a gentle touch for her to finish the incision. My OB also informed me that my life was spared by 1 centimeter. She said that my previous incision had opened up to within 1 centimeter on both sides of my major arteries. Had it opened 1 centimeter more either direction, I would not be sitting here today telling this story. I would not get to be the mom to my girls or the wife to my husband. Had it opened 1 more centimeter, they would have had no time to save me and very little time to save my sweet baby girl. I have no idea why God chose to save me, but I am so thankful. We also learned after the fact that the cord, the umbilical cord, had wrapped tightly around my baby girl's neck. Had she been delivered via the VBAC as we had planned, this could have impacted her oxygen. They later did tests on the blood in the cord and the blood close to her body, and there was no real variant, so they determined that she was never deprived of oxygen. Just another miracle. Never deprived of oxygen. At 10:30, my baby was officially born via C-section. It's hard to believe that from the time of the epidural to the time of the C-section when they took her out, it was 1 hour. This speaks volumes to the preparedness of the hospital staff. They worked so quickly and so efficiently to save both of our lives. I don't know how long it was before I got wheeled back to my husband in our labor and delivery room, but I do remember still feeling very loopy. I remember the OB being in the room with a translator on a tablet explaining the surgery and the miracles that I mentioned to my husband. Soon attention turned to me, and they quickly realized that I was not okay. I had weakened strength in my right side, my right hand, my right eye was drooping. I had blurry and double vision on my right side. My speech was slurred and my mouth was slightly drooping to the right. After only minutes of being with my husband, they determined that I needed a CT scan to rule out a stroke. Trudy accompanied me to the CT. She had been taking my vitals every 15 minutes since the initial incident, and she stayed by my side the entire time. I later learned from Trudy that they got me to the CT and back so quickly that she only missed 1 set of her 15-minute vitals. Like, that is how speedy they did it. Another miracle. They put such a priority on my health to reduce all of the risks and time possible. The CT was read as soon as possible, and everything ended up coming back normal. They still didn't know what was going on, but they knew that I had not had a stroke. I had to wait till the CT scans were read until they could start giving me any form of pain meds. So that was fun after a C-section with no pain meds and an epidural that wasn't really working. At this point, it was well into the afternoon. I hadn't been giving any pain medications because they were waiting to rule out any complications. By the time I finally got pain medications, it was almost unbearable. They like to be proactive with pain management, but in my case, we were forced to play catch up because we had to make sure that my health was okay and that I was safe. So that night was horrendous, just full of more pain than I can even begin to explain. Another miracle that occurred was that Trudy got special permission for me to go and see my baby. She was being held in what I'll refer to as the NICU. She had 24-hour care. It was right across they called it the nursery, but it was right across the hall from my room. But I couldn't get up yet. And technically, in order for me to go visit her, I would have had to be up and in a wheelchair to go. They wheeled my entire gurney bed in to visit my baby girl. Another miracle, and I thank Trudy. Hold on, because my sweet baby girl just woke up.
She's like, oh, I know that voice. You come over here, Dad, and you get some pictures. Go ahead. Or where I'm at, Chris.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Congratulations. You come over here, Dad. Squeeze everywhere you can. I'm gonna get out of the way so we have more room for you and telling me to come over here. Hasta aquí es muy bien también. You'll get a
Por las rachatas.
You'll get a better video that way.
Sí.
Wait. Don't call this. Sorry. Come. For babies.
I'm telling this sweet baby girl's story, and she didn't want to be left out. Do you want to say hi? She's about 3.5 months old. Yeah, look. Look at our friends. Say hello. We're going to tell you my name later because Eliana had a fun way of telling it, but the video didn't get saved. So we're going to tell this story of your name later. So that doesn't get to be shared yet, but subscribe so you don't miss it. Okay, she was in the nursery, round the clock care, amazing nurses again. She was having trouble regulating her blood sugar, so she had to be on a dextrose drip. Oh, she had quite a few complications post-birth. She had also swallowed meconium, which is the baby's first poop. And her belly was full of amniotic fluid, so they had to pump that, and it was also making it hard for her to breathe. They put a drain in her stomach and kept her on oxygen because her oxygen levels kept dropping. She wasn't stable in terms of oxygen. I was bedbound, and they somehow found a way to squeeze that giant gurney into this nursery just so that I could see her. And Trudy, they tried to stop, and they're like, no, the bed's not going to fit. The bed's not going to fit. Trudy stopped and she goes, oh no, it will fit. But they made sure that I could see my sweet baby girl. That was like top priority. And that was so healing for my heart. She had so many tubes and IVs and that was heartbreaking, but she was stable. And that was what was important. And at that moment I realized we were going to be okay. We were going to be a family of 4. We were going to be okay. They monitored me closely, and eventually those facial nerves went back to normal. Later on, the anesthesiologist came to talk to me and informed me that I have a different anatomy. Something in my anatomy caused a syndrome that's known as Horner's syndrome, which from what I understand, and I could be confused because I was on lots of medications when they were explaining this to me, but from what I understand, the way that my anatomy works, the epidural didn't go down to put my lower body to sleep. It went up to a part of my brain, which caused all of those symptoms. He said it would be important that I need to inform any future anesthesiologist of this prior to any procedures. But the gist of it is that my spine carried the medication up rather than down with gravity. This symptom is also why it looked like stroke-like symptoms. And as soon as the epidural wore off, all of those symptoms went away. Over the next few days, they got my pain under control. Baby girl continued to heal. And we still have a lot of healing to do physically, emotionally. We've gotten a lot better in the last 3 months, huh, babes? Whew. And we don't take a single minute for granted. We are so thankful to be home and together. Unfortunately, there's an order of how easy it is to recover from delivery. And the order from easiest to hardest is like a natural birth, a normal vaginal birth, cesarean birth without labor, cesarean birth after labor, which mine was a cesarean birth after labor, but mine was also a cesarean birth after a uterine rupture. So that was fun. That was a whole new healing journey for me to be on. As we left the hospital a few days later, I don't even remember how many days we were at the hospital. Like, I'm telling you, everything was a blur at that point, and my only focus was on healing, feeding my sweet little girl, and making sure we were healthy and well. The hospital also loaned me a pump so that I could get her milk even while she was in with tubes and everything. Like, they just did so much to take care of us. As we left the hospital, my husband stopped at the nurse's station to thank them.
All right, my sweet, sweet, sweet girl. We are already packed up, moved out, Daddy, you ready to go home?
Yes. Aunque no es mi casa, pero estoy buscando a mi hija.
Oh, we get to go home and see our other daughter. Oh, we've missed her.
We'll end the video with this. What are the odds? A uterine rupture is rare, happening less than 1% of women who attempt trial of labor after cesarean. However, uterine rupture is life-threatening for you and your baby. During a uterine rupture, the cesarean scar on the uterus breaks open. An emergency C-section is needed to prevent life-threatening complications. Despite apparently proper placement, approximately 5 to 8% of epidural blocks may be incomplete. Yeah, mine was definitely incomplete, but because of Horner syndrome. Horner syndrome is usually an unusual side effect of epidural analgesia, this says. Its incidence is reported to be 0.5% of epidural analgesia for labor. The nuclear cord, when the umbilical cord becomes wrapped around the fetus's neck, 360 degrees, occurs in about 10 to 29% of fetuses and increases in the possibility of incidence with advancing gestational age. Meconium aspiration syndrome, a leading cause of severe illness and death in a newborn, occurs in about 5% to 10% of births. It typically occurs when the fetus is stressed during labor. Hey, I think we were both a little stressed, weren't we? Weren't we, chickadee? Especially when the infant is past its due date. Yeah, you hung on there a little bit, didn't you? We truly were the rare birth case. That's all I have. But like I said at the beginning, when all of this happened and we looked back and we looked at the traumatic birth that had just occurred, at first I thought to myself and I was so bummed that I lost out on my redemptive birth story because my first one was horrendous. But you know what's interesting? As traumatic as this birth for Sweet Girl was, it was less traumatic than my first birth. And I will fully say that this one gave me my redemptive story because even though it was so traumatic, I never felt alone. God was so present through my husband, through my nurses, through my doctor, that I got that redemptive story. It wasn't what I had hoped for. It wasn't what I had planned. But God redeemed it in that moment. And he gave me the opportunity to be a mom. Not only to this sweet girl, but to my amazing 3-year-old. And to continue to be a wife. So for that, I'm thankful. We've got more videos coming of our crazy journey back to Colombia. Of all sorts of things that happened after this one was born. And those are fun stories and happy moments. If you don't want to miss those, make sure you subscribe. And we will post her name coming up really soon. Bye-bye, YouTube. I love you. We'll see you on the next video. Yeah, say bye-bye. Say bye-bye.